So I really love that Visit Flanders uses the metaphor of the tree, as do I, in a very similar way. So here's how I think about it. I imagine that the people, those parts, those residents and hosts and enterprises are represented by the roots of the tree. And that in offering up that visitor experience, it's like the branches and leaves and fruit, the offering and inviting that visitor into the ecosystem. And then the trunk of the tree represents that supportive, connective infrastructure where we find each other and we find encounter. What I find especially interesting about the metaphor of the tree is that most of the trunk of the tree is dead. There's a thin layer of living tissue just under the bark called the cambium, and this is where life flows from roots to leaves and leaves to roots. So most of the infrastructure is actually dead, but it's necessary. The trunk is necessary to raise up those leaves to the light and life of the sun and bring it back in to feed the roots. And in the same way, in the visitor economy, in tourism, I think we sometimes fall into the trap of thinking that those assets, the physical assets, are the industry. And they are necessary to connect us, to enable us to reach out and host people and host each other. But let's not forget that what we're really doing is hosting that flow of life between the place keepers and the visitors. So now I want to offer a guiding framework to help you listen for those fertile conditions and to offer some guidance as you go back into your own work and your own communities. So if we go back to our tree, and we want a little bit more detail, because it's nice to think about engaging the parts, but what does that mean? How do we do that? What's involved? So if we start with the roots, those residents and hosts and enterprises, the first fertile condition that we have to cultivate is the ability for people to find their mastery. We all want to do our jobs well. We want to make a contribution, right? And this is not in the kind of McDonald's model of everyone is replaceable, but we want to bring something of ourselves and learn continuously, like a master craftsman or an artisan. So the more we can create the conditions for that to be true in our organizations and in our communities, the more life people will bring. If we want even more passion and aliveness, then we also create the conditions for people to feel a sense of membership and belonging, so that they feel a connection to their colleagues, to their neighbors, to the visitors as well, right? And if we want outrageous levels of passion and commitment and loyalty, then we give people an opportunity to find a sense of meaning so that their work is contributing to something bigger than themselves. We all want that, right? It's different for everyone, but we can create the fertile conditions for people to discover that for themselves in our organizations and in our communities in some of the ways that we heard about this morning, engaging them in conversations to explore what that would look like for them. So if we go to the visitor experience and how do we invite them into this ecosystem and invite them to bring their life and their passion and aliveness, the first thing we need is to make some contribution, some outreach. And this is where we would normally be talking about our commodity. I've got beds, I've got food, right? But we need more than that. We don't want to be stuck with the commodity. We want to offer some contribution. I find that this language invites us to consider more in how we make our offering to the visitors. And if we don't get that right, then it's hard to really engage with the rest. So that's an important foundation. But if we want even more loyalty and enthusiasm, then we offer people a sense of community and conversation and maybe even co-creation. I loved the story from Flanders Fields about the poppy seeds and how people could take those seeds back to their hometown and plant them and then share on Facebook the pictures of where they had planted them and that the map is now red. That's a beautiful example of engaging people, the visitor, so that they feel that they're also part of this living ecosystem. And I think it was also another beautiful example of offering people a heroic cause, so that visiting your area is somehow meaningful to them. It's somehow doing good or serving something that's bigger than themselves, right? If we can get that combination, all three of those together, then it's powerful and resilient and adaptive and creative. So you might notice that just like the trees, roots and branches are kind of mirror images of each other. The same is true in our organizations, in our communities, that what engages us has to be really connected to what engages those we're serving. They can't be cut off and separate, as they so often are. And so our task is to build that supportive and connective infrastructure to bring them together. And the first is the structure that we talked about. We do need to make sure that there are roads and spaces, places for us to meet. We have the structure that we need to bring our mastery in service of contribution, but we also need the systems of being in conversation. And we're discovering new ways to do that. We heard stories of engaging with visitors in really different types of conversation and engaging with residents as well. So these are new skill sets that we may have to develop, moving into this new way of being in tourism. And the final piece is story. Story as what holds it all together. And this is not a static, stagnant story that some marketing agency writes and it lives that way forevermore. This is a living story and an evolving, unfolding story. So most of all, this is about the disciplines and practices of continuously checking in on what is the story that we're living together, and are we living it coherently across all of these other aspects of our stewardship. So some of those things, you might notice the first column, those are quite tangible things that we can craft. We can build and design. And that middle column is more the how. These are things that we can co-create together with each other and with residents. And that final column, the why, that can only be cultivated and invited. That's where it's really that amorphous, maybe it's even spiritual part. But this is where we get into new skill sets of sensing what's arising here and what's alive. And all of that comes together in that practice of stewardship, that informed intention and practice of cultivating the fertile conditions for life to thrive in our communities. So all of this comes together at a time when there's such urgent need. We heard all morning, especially from Daniel, about the dire need for tourism to reinvent itself, not just to tweak at the edges, but to rethink what the role of tourism is in the world. So my belief is that we have to get more informed and more intentional about aligning with life so that hosts and visitors and other individuals can experience more aliveness, health, joy, justice, learning, self-expression, and self-awareness, so that enterprises achieve their intended purpose creatively, gracefully, and resiliently, while attracting and cultivating necessary resources, so that the community discovers more connectedness, creativity, resilience, and self-reliance. And so the biosphere is supported in its ability to be healthy and regenerative over time. This is what's at stake, and this is what's possible. So your work is vitally important in this reflection, these 2 days and beyond. So the question I'd like to leave you with is this one. As we have talked so far and heard presentations, the tendency is to bring it back to our own individual activities, but you have power together to affect change and transformation if you can come together in one conversation about what the role of tourism is and what it needs to be. So this is a question I would like to offer and leave with you maybe encourage you to share your thoughts on the Post-it notes that keep being offered to you. But really, I hope that this is what we can explore together over these 2 days and beyond. What is the one conversation you all want to have with the world? Thank you.